Welcome back to the garden in Raleigh, North Carolina. My name is Jim Putnam. If you've followed the channel for any length of time, we shoot videos here in an urban space in Raleigh, North Carolina, fairly small urban lot. It's 0.19 acres. Been working on this garden for about 3 years or something, followed along on YouTube, and then we left for 2 months. We went on a trip and just left. We put the container plants in the ground and we just pulled back into the driveway, and now we're seeing what it looks like. It's a mess, as you would expect. In the fall, you're gonna have leaves dropping and, you know, things going on in the garden. A lot of annuals that we didn't remove before we left have been killed by frost and freezes, and those things need to come out of the ground, and some general things. But let's jump around here and see what it looks like. Right before we left, a couple videos went up. They were finishing up the siding on the house. If you go back to the original video from this, the house was green aluminum siding. It's been replaced and painted. Steps still need to be painted. The foundation still needs to be painted. So there's a few more details on the house itself that need to be done, but the house has changed dramatically. What we're coming back to here is we had left some annuals in the ground that were still blooming. The pollinators were still on them 2 months ago. They've been knocked back at this point. Perennial, you know, there's a lot of native perennials along this front of this fence area out here that have been knocked back quite a bit. Some of that will be cleaned up, some of it won't. I leave some of these perennials standing during the winter time. You can see the leaves out here by the street. We're gonna do a video in the next few days on, we keep all of these leaves, and we'll show you how to break them down and, you know, how we use them in the garden. There's still a lot of things in bloom, and maybe show that in a separate video, because we're right here at the beginning of December, end of November, right at the turn of the clock to December. There's been a lot of freezes, but some stuff is still just continuing to bloom like crazy. This Caryopteris, first choice Caryopteris, just continues to be, it's still in virtually full bloom, amazingly. There's nothing, nothing is more excited about being home than Holly. She's out here in the front garden exploring her space that she gets to roam. She doesn't mind traveling. She does okay traveling, and she's got to see the Pacific Ocean, and she's been in a lot of this dog has been in a lot of states. I mean, and really has traveled quite a bit in her lifetime. She's 15 years old, but she's very happy. She ran to the front door and has explored ever since, inside and out. The turf area out here is a mess. Again, annual border back here when we left, was in full bloom. You get a couple frost on it since then. We'll rip these out of the ground. We'll be putting in a few pansies, but not many. So that'll be an upcoming video as well. And again, there's still some things amazingly with lots of color out here, almost the beginning of December. Again, there's just messes here and there. This area along the edge of the driveway, things have just bled out here onto the driveway. We got a little bit of rain after we left. Still not enough though. We were coming past, all the lakes here in the southeast, rivers in the southeast. Really, the Mississippi was startlingly low, but then from there all the way here, everything's missing water for sure. And that includes the ground here at the house. Some of the, again, some of the annuals are really frost sensitive. Like you get a frost right around 32 degrees, a little bit of ice on them, and they just die. That would include things like vinca and a few other things. And then there's some things that can take 29, 28, depends on how many hours they're getting it. This lantana still has some flowers on it, and it's seen the mid-20s at least a couple times at this point. So I need to get this. I wish it would go ahead and get cold enough to knock this thing completely back, because it does have some. It is kind of eating some other things, but it's interesting to come back after 2 months and see, I know what temperatures we had while I was gone, because I was monitoring it, and seeing what some of these annuals, because normally we would have taken all these annuals out or cleaned up some of the perennials, cleaned up some of the stuff along the way. So you're walking back into it going, so that's capable of taking 25 degrees, a couple of nights, and only getting a little bit of burn on the top of it. It got back to being warm. The thing would be, this lantana would just continue to bloom through the winter unless we get something in the low 20s, obviously, is what's going to knock it back. We maintain a lot of container plants here in the garden in Raleigh, and that was one thing I didn't want to burden anyone with. maintaining all of these things. It's easier to ask somebody, can you check the mail and water a couple house plants, than it is, will you monitor the 50 containers we have out in the garden at any given moment. So we came up with a strategy to just plant every container plant in the ground. We took them out of the containers, put them in the ground, and to see how that would work. And I knew it would work better. It definitely will work better than if the plants are in the containers above the ground. They're more vulnerable to being frozen, obviously more vulnerable to being the water issue, being dry, being wet, being dry, being wet. It was dry though when we were leaving. This stuff was watered in, but it was dry for a period longer after we left. So the Boulevard cypress here that we've had in a container for about 3 years has some brown on the interior of it. You'll see that in conifers this time of year. You'll see some brown thinning from the middle. When it gets a little excessive, it just means it was really dry, drier than it wanted to be. But everything here has done pretty good. This is a pretty good strategy, I think. And honestly, we were at a point with a lot of the things that were in the containers that they had reached the size that we probably, they either needed to go in the ground or go into a larger container, or maybe needed to be divided, or they needed some sort of maintenance done to them. So this was an easy solution, right? We'd put them all in the ground. They're in a protected space for the winter time. There's a couple things here that are too cold sensitive, and a couple have taken a little bit of damage. So I didn't have missed. This is a 97% success rate. So let's look at the positive instead of the 3% failure rate of a couple things we're obviously going to lose from the cold. But overall, I like this strategy, and I might employ this strategy in the future, just taking my things that are in the containers and just popping them in the vegetable garden, which this is what this is. I wasn't growing anything else here at the time, and letting them overwinter in the ground and then deciding on what they're going to be the following year. Some things did really well while we were gone. This spiny thistle, which wasn't here 2 months ago, this weed has grown 2 feet, and it's now blooming. But nice looking foliage, nice looking flowers. But that's a spiny thistle. I got lots of work to do back here. This patio is still going in. That foundation was put in, and stones have been just kind of scattered about because I've had people come through here and I wanted someplace for them to walk on. But these stones have to be laid properly, and you can see all the leaves that have gathered in them. The leaf cleanup is the easiest part. I mean, this place will look 10 times better with just a little bit of leaf cleanup off a few spaces. But we don't get rid of our leaves, and that'll be part of another video. The white oak behind us back here, if Steph will pan up to the white oak, you can see they can be a little slow losing their leaves. The red buds and maples and pecan and dogwoods and other things I see are mostly done shedding, and the oaks are still going to just drop one leaf here and one leaf there and one leaf there and drive you nuts for a month and a half, but that's okay. The border here, a lot of the salvias are still blooming, and regardless of whether we have our perennial salvias, perennial sage out front, all salvia family things. All of them are pretty daggone cold tolerant typically. They're all perennials. Not all are perennials here in my area in zone 7B or 8A now on the new zone map, but I treat it as 7B. But basically all of the salvia in this entire garden, even after 2 mid-20 nights over the last month, are still blooming in some capacity. So I don't know if the bees are coming out on them during warmer days. I haven't been here, so today's quite a cool day. So it'll be interesting tomorrow to see here right up until the beginning of December, if we get a warm day or two, whether the bees will continue to visit these things, even though they look rough. Should I be leaving them up longer than I normally do? You can probably hear leaf blowers out in the background. We've got the leaves are being picked up in the area in the next few days, and everybody panics and blows them all out to the street. And we don't, but it's all you hear. It's like the song. It's the song of the fall, leaf blower time. Okay, lots of things still flowering, and I'm probably going to do a separate video because there's a lot of intent here, in this garden to make sure that something's happening all the time. And we're lucky enough to be in an area of the country where that can be the case. And so Farfugium, even though it's gotten enough freeze to actually damage the leaves just a little, Flower spikes are still coming up. Definitely have pollinators on those. Any warm day this time of year, you're going to get pollinators on those Farfugium for sure. Mahonia is another thing. Definitely be blooming this time of year. These can bloom, just depends on the winter. Sometimes they'll open more like February, March, and sometimes they can do it on this side of Christmas or New Year's. Even still, there'll probably be a few more flower spikes down in here that will happen later, kind of later in the winter time. There's osmanthus blooming out here. Can't smell it. Osmanthus is interesting. You need kind of a warmish evening temperatures to really smell them, but they're orange and white osmanthus are blooming. And then of course we have lots of camellias. Coming home to Camellias sasanqua season. This is one that I had actually grown at my nursery years ago that's ended up here in the garden in Raleigh. We are coming home to a bit of a messy garden, but that's pretty easy to fix. I don't think that's, with the small of a lot, just doesn't take that long to clean up leaves, knock leaves off plants, and just generally rake the path and that kind of thing. All that's pretty straightforward. But what you won't see out here are very many weeds. We've really worked very hard to get the cap on the ground here between compost and mulch and wood chips and other things. Have just kind of buried a lot of the old weed seeds out here. We'll get some here or there, but really not many. I'm pretty comfortable leaving here for a little while and knowing that when I come back, I'm not gonna have a whole lot of weeds, but I need to jump on them quick because anything that might be thinking about seeding itself, we want to get out of the garden. Not as many things doing that this time of year as there would be in other times of the year, but we try to get them as quick as possible. What we will get out here though is these invasive weeds. Here's a ligustrum as a great example of that. Evergreen shrub that's, you know, got one over here on the side lot that probably has 10 million seeds on it. It feels like it's 25 feet, you know, gosh, it's probably 35 feet tall or something like that. But that's always dropping seed. We've had ivy growing up in the trees back here behind us, and this lot behind us that's vacant is mostly English ivy. And so I'll see that coming up. We'll get some of those perennial woody plants coming up out here, but not a whole lot of just herbaceous weeds, you know, the henbit chickweed, those kinds of winter weeds that might have come up. So keeping this mulch cap and keeping the mulch fresh multiple times a year is definitely reduces the amount of labor we have coming back after 2 months. One of the things that fascinates me in the garden is that when plants grow, most of the growing that plants do is at nighttime, and they gathering the sun's energy during the day, and then they actually do their growing during the night. And some things in the heat of the summer, the nighttime temperatures don't cool off enough, and they kind of go into a summer dormancy. So most of you get all that crazy spring growth on things. And then as we get into fall, you'll notice the conifers and some other, a few other things in your garden put on some growth at that time. And while we were gone, this Fatshedra probably grew 1.5 to 2 feet, something like that. It was blooming when we left, but all of this crazy new growth on it. There's several things, a few things in the garden that are doing this. The Fatsia, the shrub Fatsia is in full bloom right now, and it'll be in another a separate video. But I'm amazed this Fatshedra. It's definitely one of those plants that would prefer nighttime temperatures to be a little cooler for it to grow. This is evergreen. It'll keep its leaves throughout the winter. Slightly marginal here, so if we got a night that was, teens, something like that, we'll come out here and throw something over this. It doesn't attach to the wall on its own. It has to be tied up. So this next spring, I'll put something here and continue to, allow it to come up and over the porch in the future. But just another little fascinating thing. One thing we definitely missed while we were gone was the fall color. We saw it in other places around the country, and if you've watched any of the videos from Isley Nursery, we showed some of the Japanese maples with their full color up in Oregon. We definitely missed it here. The Viburnum nudum still has some color in the leaves. The Tokyo Tower Kyananthus or Tokyo Tower fringe tree has a little bit of this gold color on it. Japanese maples have kind of finished at this point, so not a lot of fall color left in the garden, but we did plant things here. Or there's oak leaf hydrangea, does have some good fall color out in the front. There are things planted in this garden with fall color intent. We just weren't here to see it this year. We just skipped that period of the garden this year. Thank you guys so much for following along with the channel. Before we left, we talked about a new foundation planting now that the house is almost, the exterior of the house is almost finished. So that content will be coming up. I'm going to show off the blooming things out here in the garden, things that are blooming with intent, that should be blooming this time of year. We have a few things that are linger blooming, I would call it. They're just going longer than we would have expected. But there are some things out here that we know would be blooming this time of year, and they were planted with intent to be blooming this time of year, so that'll be coming as well. And how we handle some of the maintenance, the leaves, that kind of thing out here in the garden. Thanks so much for following along.